Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP John Paz. With me today, two very special guests. Of course, we've got Matt King, the Granimaniac, the Granimal himself, and of course, the UFC Hall of Famer, UFC welterweight champion, Mr. Pat Miletich. What's going on, guys? How you guys doing?
Great.
I'm good, thank you.
Now, Matt, what is going on with this new promotion, this new league you got going on, and Shoot Pro? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, man. Shoot Pro is the brainchild of Jake Shannon, who's had scientific wrestling for the last 20 plus years, run some awesome camps featuring his coaches, Josh Barnett, Wade Chalice, the King of Pins, Pat Miletich, UFC Hall of Famer, just did a great camp down here in Florida. He's a disciple of Billy Robinson and Carl Gotch. And he came up with this concept of Shoot Pro, and he's run 3 shows at a really cool venue in Colorado. Some great grapplers and collegiate amateur wrestlers. And we are bringing Catch to the Cage. We are bringing Shoot Pro to the cage on August 31st. And I'll throw it to Pat because he can tell you more about the show itself. It's an MMA show.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We're doing, actually, it's my girlfriend who's the promoter with Skydancer Casino in North Dakota. 12 MMA fights will be on the card. And, of course, the Shoot Pro match. First time that I know of in modern history, certainly, where there's been a catch match. And that's really important to reintroduce the sport back here in North Dakota. But, no, it's going to be very exciting. It's... we're really pumped about the process and reintroducing the sport all around America and bringing it back to its greatness that it deserves, right? And it's a much more exciting version of grappling than people are used to watching because of the pin or submission, and so the aggression is much higher, the pace is much higher, and the athleticism, it's going to be much higher.
Yeah, and Pat and I are excited to call this match and to kind of frame it for the pro wrestling fans. I'll mention my Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling, starting with Frank Gotch from the Shoot era, the turn of the century. And, man, he used to fill baseball stadiums. They used to fill stadiums back in the day. His legendary battle with George Hackenschmidt. He was a disciple of the grandfather of American wrestling, Martin Farmer Burns, both guys from Iowa, like Pat. And my next on my Mount Rushmore is Gorgeous George, who was not only the top wrestling star of early television, he was the top television star. I just read his book, which was a great read. And he came from the carnivals, much like my mentors, Billy Wicks and Frankie Kane, taking on all comers. And he was kind of a rugged guy. And he had that rugged look. But man, did he change that, because he saw the dawn of TV. And he created the Gorgeous George character, which was the biggest star in early TV, with the blonde hair, the bobby pins, the valets, spraying, disinfecting the ring before he would allow his opponent to touch him. And he was awesome. And then next on my Mount Rushmore is Lou Thesz, who was the Ultimate Territory champion during the territory days, held that NWA belt when they had all the territories and would be the traveling champion. And then, of course, number 4, brother, the Hulkster. And, man, Hulkamania, there was nothing like it. I grew up in the 80s, and I was a Hulkamaniac to the core. And then Hulk Hogan, being that, similar to Gorgeous George, being that mainstream TV star, movies, he also bled into the NWO era, which went parallel with the Attitude Era, and like Eric Bischoff, who I just saw in St. Augustine a few weeks ago, he was the ultimate 83 weeks. They had that 83 weeks where they were beating WWE in the ratings with the NWO. So he crossed eras. So that's my Mount Rushmore, and we're going back to the future with Shoot Pro, back to the days of the Frank Gotch era, and we're going to have it be a shoot. And Jake's already been doing it, as I mentioned, but we're going to grow this brand. We're really excited about it.
And Pat, it's actually going to be in the cage, right? You've done it before, but in the ring, right?
Yes.
I'm going to be refereeing some of the matches, and so I'm excited about that. I'll be there signing autographs, and I'm just super excited that I've been to obviously a million MMA shows. I've been to a ton of grappling tournaments, and I'm just excited that we're finally making it happen in terms of adding this exciting, the Shoot Pro, the catch as catch can style, and introduce it to. It's going to be a full house. I mean, Skydancer Casino has purchased a brand new cage. They see a long relationship with Mariah Prussia, the Define the Fight MMA organization. So they're very excited, and I'm really pumped to just look. I'm going to enjoy looking at the faces of the people in the crowd as they observe this going down. Right, that's the sort of thing. It's like when you go fishing with your kid. It's like, I don't even care if I catch anything. I just want to look at the expression on the faces of my kids when they're catching fish. That's the type of feeling that I'm going to have. But going back to Matt's, his Mount Rushmore, I agree with him on a lot of his picks. I mean, you really have to, but I'm a guy that looks at like the Vern Gagne, who was the segue from the old world, the catch as catch and the great wrestling era, to moving on to the modern era. I gotta say that Hulk Hogan stole his style from superstar Billy Graham. So, he wasn't even the original. So I don't know what Matt's talking about there. And Hackenschmidts, the Gotchas, the Burns, all those guys, I mean, they belong on there. But what about Danny Hodge, brother? Danny Hodge, little old 140, 150-pound Danny Hodge would shake anybody's hand and crush it.
Yeah, there's some dissension in the ranks with the Shoot Pro broadcast team here, man. And yeah, Vern Gagne, you mentioned Vern, two-time NCAA national champion out of the University of Minnesota. And to show how rugged pro wrestling was back then, both guys that he beat in the finals had great careers, stellar careers in professional wrestling. But I got to mention, when you mentioned Vern Gagne, my buddy down here in Florida, Larry Zbyszko, he had the best gimmick before Triple H. Triple H stole his gimmick. Hulk Hogan, who is on my Mount Rushmore, claimed that Vern's daughter, Kathy Gagne, had a great body, but a face like Greg Gagne. But Larry Zbyszko went ahead and married her and made himself world champion. Larry, too, with a stellar shoot background, state champion at Allegheny High School, earned himself a scholarship wrestling at Penn State. So the history of professional wrestling, there's so many shooters out there, and we want to bring some of these shooters for matches as we build and grow this. We've been talking at length with Jake Hager, Jack Swagger, about coming on board with us. I know he's going to be doing a commercial coming up for Shoot Pro. We'd love to get him in the broadcast booth. And ultimately, we'd love to get guys like him and Matt Riddle, who we've also been talking to, in the cage. So I was tasked by Jake to grow this thing, get us sponsors, get us TV, working with a guy that I host a show in South Florida with Larry Matza called A Night in the Life on the CW network. And the program director down there, Davey Accavetti, has TV in Vegas as well with the CW affiliate. So we're looking at getting a slick 30-minute presentation for TV here in North Dakota with the pre-show, showing the guys training with some music in the background, interviewing them, and then ultimately showing folks what is the most exciting competition we feel in combat sports, Back to the Future, shoot pro wrestling. Because when you have the pin, it forces the action. It is a pro wrestling pin. It's going to be the 3-second pin and submissions and 5-minute periods. So 3 5-minute periods, best of 3. So the guys really have to go. And that's why we are so excited, because we know from Jake's past shows with some world-class grapplers that these are very exciting matches. And I think the pro wrestling fans and the MMA fans alike are going to love it.
Yeah, and that's something to point out, that Matt was talking about with the 3 5-minute rounds. This will be my first point, is that, look, even somebody who's out of shape, who's a good grappler, can lay on their back and coast if they know what they're doing, right? I mean, we all know that. But when you add the pin, that's when it forces people to scramble, to get out of trouble. I mean, that's a really big, important thing for people to understand that are going to be watching this. And as this sport explodes back on the scene, that's why it's going to explode back on the scene, because it will be absolute pandemonium at times in the cage where people are scrambling for their dear life. And, my second point is that, talking about our broadcast, and as this grows and we end up on TV, I'm a little concerned about my broadcast partner, Granahan, because normally, the guy's always got, attractive women on his left and on his right for all these types of podcasts and things like that. And the last 3 that we've done, there's been none. Like, he's been petting a dog and stuff, and there's something missing. Matt's losing his touch. I feel bad for the guy, but Matt, we gotta maybe, I don't know, get you working out again. We'll figure it out though.
Yeah, man, the silver fox. I'm getting up there in years, man. I don't know. When I used to call the Waco kickboxing in your home state of Iowa with Sonny Ono and Shoney Carter, and I'd have a ring girl on each shoulder running around the ring. I don't know if those days are over. We're going to find out in North Dakota.
Yeah, we're going to maybe get you a Viagra sponsorship or something, get something happening for you,
Vitamin C, the Seattle. What's the one that sponsors all the pro wrestling podcasts? Is it Real Chew? Blue Chew. Blue Chew.
Yeah.
Yes.
Blue Chew.
Yes.
I'm curious, because there's been so much kind of wrestlers going into MMA going into pro wrestling. Who do you guys think? I guess we'll start, Pat. Who do you think is the best? To me, and I'll just throw who I think is the best guy that went from wrestling to MMA. I think Kazushi Sakuraba is the best. Who's like maybe a few guys that you could think of that made that transition pretty smoothly?
I mean, you've got a great point with Sakuraba, certainly. I mean, and Japanese pro wrestling is so cool. I've been in Japan a lot back in the day when I was fighting and coaching, and even for some broadcasting. But there's something special, something unique about the Japanese crowds and all of that. But I mean, look, I think I think back of just legendary stories of while Danny Hodge, because of the Hodge Award and all that sort of stuff, him showing up and going to do walking into a hardware store and breaking all the unbreakable pliers on a radio remote, and telling everybody that they were going to be in town at Memorial Stadium and all that sort of stuff. Very cool stuff. But I don't know. I think Lesnar did a great job. Lesnar, made a lot of money, and certainly maybe not the best acting skills, so to speak, but certainly, a great athlete and imposing figure and perfect heel bad guy, right?
Yeah, I want to segue on that point to the history of MMA, and I did a book years ago. We started writing it 18 years ago. I think it came out 16 years ago, Rough and Tumble, that I did with Eric Paulson, that traces the history of grappling and MMA. And pro wrestling fans, many don't realize how MMA evolved out of professional wrestling. Eric was a world Shuto champion, and Shuto, founded by Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama, predates the UFC. You had Pancras and Rings, and even going back before that, and this is something that pro wrestling fans, I'd be surprised if anyone even listening knows this. Who trained the Gracies? The Gracies were trained by a catch wrestler and judoka who had hundreds of competitive catch matches. And also, the Gracie family ran the carnivals and the fairs in Brazil with the Take On All Comers. And that was a man named Count Koma, Mitsuyu Maeda. So the roots of jiu-jitsu are heavily rooted in the catch wrestling as well, in the catch wrestling history. And I say, you know, Brazilians are a lot like Sicilians, are very laid back people. So they modified what Count Koma Maeda taught them. And that's where it became more of the guard work and the slower paced jiu-jitsu matches. But we're really bringing things back to the future. And that's what we really want to stress with Shoot Pro Wrestling. And we really want to get pro wrestling fans that listen to your show to understand the history and the roots of what they're watching when they watch shows like AEW and WWE. A dear friend of ours, Paz, just passed away, Kevin Sullivan. And I joined Kevin's Army of Darkness a few years ago at a show in Daytona Beach, and Kevin told me a lot of the stories of him shooting with Mike Graham when he came into the business, and Jerry Briscoe, our commissioner. And I knew about this, but Florida is way ahead of other states in the South in amateur wrestling, and the reason for that is Eddie Graham and him sponsoring all the programs, the Briscoe brothers, Bob Roop, Dale Lewis. These were the guys that built the wrestling programs, all stellar amateur wrestlers that went from the mat to the squared circle, but that built amateur wrestling here in the state of Florida. So we want pro wrestling fans to understand their roots, and that's really what's so exciting about what we're doing with Shoot Pro Wrestling.
Love that. Going back to the roots there. I'm actually surprised with the Gracies. I didn't realize that either. That's awesome. That like the actual history of them. That's amazing.
Yeah, you know, when I do the pro wrestling fan conventions, I mentioned I saw Bischoff. We had some cocktails with him at the River City convention in St. Augustine. When I'm at the tables, I'll sell my book, the Rough and Tumble book, and one of a fellow that's down in a Mexican prison, unfortunately now, Phil Baroni, used to be my favorite guy to have with me, because we would give the fans their own promo if they bought a book or one of his T-shirts, and it's a great place to go to explain the history to folks, and you explain it to them quickly in sound bites, and you're trying to sell a book. But the history of professional wrestling is something that we want to bring back, and we're going to have a killer intro too when we do this broadcast that will highlight that history.
Pat, are you a big wrestling fan just in general? Have you always been a big wrestling fan?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can't not be a wrestling fan of all types. Having grown up in Iowa, Bettendorf, Iowa, of all places, which is a powerhouse even within the state of Iowa. And when I was growing up, I mean, we were always ranked top 3 in the state of Iowa. From the time I was in elementary, middle school, high school, and even after I graduated and things like that, we were a powerhouse. Very rich history. My great uncle Johnny Myler Miletich, who was on the 32 Olympic boxing team, he was originally from Albia, Iowa, where my family showed up out of Yugoslavia. He, you know, being a great boxer as well, was a catch wrestler and would go to carnivals and state fairs and things like that. And the carnival strongmen, you know, do their feats of strength and then challenge people to either come up and box them or do a wrestling match against them. And that's why my uncle went, was to beat up the carnival strongmen and the state fair guys and go in and smash people. And that's how he kind of honed his skills in a lot of ways. And so back in those days, there's a great book if you can find it. 1921 was the Diamond Rush in Brazil. Ernst and Sasha Semmel, two Russian brothers who were very skilled engineers, but they were also very good boxers and wrestlers out of Russia. While they were in Brazil for the Diamond Rush, working their way through the Mato Grosso, they would stop at ranches and in towns and cities and fix everybody's guns. And that's how they would make money to get further. But then they would also do, fights against like Paraguayan strongmen and Brazilian, wrestlers and things like that in the town square to make extra money. Super, super. I mean, the book, Tigrero, if you can find it, you couldn't make up a better story about these two characters working their way through the jungles and cities of Brazil, beating everyone up, being hunted by a sheriff they had a bounty on their heads. And it's wild. It's wild. And Sasha Semmel went and found a Tigrero. A Tigrero was an Amazonian Indian who was an expert at killing 400-pound jungle cats with a spear. So they would be hired by big ranches because the big cats would kill the ranch hands and the cattle. And so the riflemen were getting taken off of their horses by these 400-pound cats and killed because the cats would double back in the tall grass and ambush them. So they started hiring Tigreros. Well, this Sasha Semmel, one of the Russian brothers, found a Tigrero, an Amazonian Indian, who literally went out, took him out, and taught him how to kill jungle cats while he was drunk. And
Wow.
There's pictures in the book. There's literally pictures in the book of Sasha Semmel going head to head with a spear with 400-pound cats. Old black and white pictures taken, from above, like in trees and stuff like that, of these battles that were going on. And like these are true men back in those days. Here, the Terrible Turks were traveling with carnivals. The American catch can guys. That's what we want. We want to bring back that level of monster.
Man, that's awesome. That sounds like a great Western. And John Wayne, as Pat had mentioned, intended to make a movie about that. And Pat's uncle was what was known as a barnstormer, who would go in and beat the guys collect the money, because it was rare that the fans would actually beat the boxers and the wrestlers, but they would get these barnstormers, guys that were highly trained that would just come in and win the money. And it's interesting what Pat mentioned about another guy who's really big on the catch wrestling that I did the rough and tumble book with, Eric Paulson. Back when I was training with Eric, what he used to do is he used to take us out and get us buzzed up and then have us go back in and grapple with a buzz on, because he said, if you ever get into a confrontation, your big drinkers coming outside the bar, you got to be able to defend yourself when you got a buzz on. So that's really cool, man. And a great segue, Pat was talking about his background in Iowa and his high school. I bringing in a guy from my alma mater, from Norwalk Wrestling. I went back home to Connecticut and reached out to some of my good friends that are still top coaches there, Charlie Vlado and an old friend and rival of mine, Spiro Papakosmos. And the name that they kept giving me as a guy that is perfect for this competition is a young man by the name of Brandon Riggins. And he's going to be competing in this match in North Dakota. And Brandon Riggins, he actually started out, he was from Massachusetts, and then his family moved to Oklahoma and had a stellar year out there. And then he came into Connecticut, and he was a two-time Connecticut state champion. His senior year, he had a perfect season, won the Connecticut State Championship, and then went on to win the All New England Championship. And then from there, he went on to have a stellar college career, two-time All-American out of Springfield Community College, JUCO. He's currently a police officer. He's in the Army. He's training with an MMA school in Springfield. And this guy, Paz, he looks like Bobby Lashley. He's like a more cut, slightly leaner Bobby Lashley. And Pat could tell you a little bit more about his opponent, because it's changed a couple times, and we got an opponent here with a very powerful name.
Yeah, he's North Dakota native. Blade Ock is his name. He's undefeated in MMA, and he has won some absolute championships against higher belts, against brown belts and black belts, and so he's 6'5", so he's quite a bit bigger, taller than Brandon is, and so it's going to be a very interesting matchup. The styles, the leverage, the explosiveness, and how these two match up. And I think, yeah, this is going to be a very, very close contested match. One guy better at pinning, the other guy much better at submissions. So it's going to be a kind of a race to who can get what, right?
Yeah, Pat, is it open weight or is there a weight limit?
They're agreeing at, I believe, between 200 and 220. So, roughly right around 210, 215 is where they're both probably going to come in at.
Yeah, Jake had mentioned it was going to be 215-pound catch weight. So, yeah, bigger guys, but explosive guys. And this is going to be fast-paced action in the cage.
Now, Matt, I know you know a ton about the history of submissions and all its other stuff, as far as the submission game. But as far as the wrestling is being mixed in, do you think that throws a different element into it? Because, like Pat was saying, the guy might be better at pins, but this guy, like, will the submission game kind of throw off the wrestling game? Like, how do you see that playing out, just as far as wrestling versus maybe some submissions?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have this type of rule set in the past, typically it's the wrestlers that have the edge because of the pin and because of the positioning. But there was one match that I talked to with Pat earlier today, a young man who was Michigan State Spartans team captain and won a catch wrestling world championship, that lost to a jiu-jitsu guy. That was Curran Jacobs. He lost to Joshua Rosenzweig, and that was because when Joshua was on his back, he kept the blade up and he kept himself very active, and he caught Curran in 2 submissions in a row. So it really depends, and the best way for guys to train at this is to do it in the gym, is to have your own matches with pin and submission to get used to it. Because if you're coming right off of the wrestling mat, or if you're coming right out of the cage or right out of the grappling world with jiu-jitsu, and you don't practice under this rule set, you don't scrimmage under this rule set, you could be caught like a deer in the headlights when you get in the cage.
Yeah, this is I guess, when I always observed, as I was coming up through the ranks and stuff, paying attention to the history of the catch can guys, the jiu-jitsu guys, the Russian sambo, all the different submission type and wrestling arts, and paying attention and being exposed to a lot of that stuff early on, I just thought, I'm going to take the best of all these worlds and combine them for our grappling type of mindset. And of course, my team, was very thick with All-American wrestlers who they were built for this stuff. And that style of grappling, which is a very punishing style of grappling. I mean, catch can. It's not a game. You don't play catch wrestling. You can literally get things ripped off of you by this type of style, and the power of world-class wrestlers who are taught submissions. Bad things can happen to you very fast, as like a Hoist Gracie found out against Matt Hughes. 2 totally different level of monster, right?
Absolutely. Matt Hughes totally dominating Hoist, and when he hooked Hoist, Hoist was pretty much going to just let his arm break out of pride. And if you watch Matt Hughes, a match that he had against Renzo Gracie, Renzo Gracie's top student, the name escapes me. He caught that opponent in a front headlock and choked him out. And in wrestling, and a lot of times those of us who go from the amateur wrestling into the grappling and MMA, there's a lot of stuff in wrestling that is dirty wrestling. A move that we call a pancake out in the Midwest, I think they call it a cow catcher. Just one example where you grab the chin and you turn it and you pancake the guy over. Well, if I take that neck and I twist it and I put my chest on top and drive, that's a neck crank. That's just one example. Double wrist lock. If you watch Mark Schultz broke one of his opponent's arms in the Olympics with that double wrist lock throw. There are moves in amateur wrestling, just the front headlock, you can choke a guy out. And if you're a dirty wrestler, sometimes you can choke a guy out in a match and pin him and then just pinch him and wake him up. So the sport of wrestling never really lost its roots with respect to it being punishing. It's just that the rules changed. And going back to the Rough and Tumble book, when I researched it, it was a gentleman named Hugo Optopolik that changed the rules of scholastic wrestling and took out the chokes. They had toe holds. They had leg locks. A lot of folks look at John Danaher as this visionary creating stuff. He didn't create anything. All of that stuff came out of the catch wrestling, came out of Sambo. They didn't have leg locks in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It was frowned upon. So really, this is the roots of grappling, and all submissions are going to be legal here. So when you get a guy off the wrestling mat who's a bit of a dirty wrestler, he can use those techniques to win in this regard, in this rule set.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because Matt Hughes back in the day, the Gracie family said, well, Matt Hughes just used Brazilian Gracie Jiu-Jitsu to beat Hoist. And Matt goes, and I publicly went, that's not even remotely true. He hit a duck under and got a takedown. Hoist tried to regain guard. Matt stopped it with put him in a half Nelson and shut it down. Matt was using literally all wrestling technique. And it's like in wrestling, when you're a leg rider, you're a leg rider. So all those types of things that they were accusing Matt of. So Matt made it the point when he went up against Renzo Gracie's student, hit him with a front headlock and choke him unconscious with a front headlock. And in the interview, even pointed out and said to everybody, I just want to make sure that we're very clear that was a wrestling technique that choked him unconscious.
Absolutely. With American wrestling. And, Nelson's too, when in coaching, I show the full Nelson on the ground, and everybody that I show that to, coaching here in Florida and Fighting Edge and any clinics, they love it because it's such a brutal hold. That full Nelson on the ground, it actually becomes a choke. It's a neck crank that becomes a choke.
You to sleep. It will absolutely put you to sleep.
Yeah, I can show you how to put a guy out with that, and I want to credit, Billy Wicks for teaching me how to do that. But also wrestling coaches. There's a lot of dirty wrestling, and there's a lot of ways to make a guy cry uncle in the sport of wrestling.
Ricardo Almeida, I believe, is the
Almeida.
guy
There we go.
Yeah.
Now, Pat, a little bit of dirty wrestling, right? And some of that stuff, shoulder choke, stuff like that. I know Dan Henderson used to do that awesome shoulder where you can't use headbutts, but he uses shoulder almost like a headbutt. I mean, you're familiar with a little bit of that stuff. Tapping out some guys with that.
I used one of those to win actually the UFC 4-man tournament that I was in. I hit Chris Brennan with that, put him on his back up against the cage and got the half guard and dropped that choke in. And, they what's the name? I modified it because I knew I had him stuck up against the cage so I could finish it. But there's a name for it. Now, I never gave names to anything that I used. I just would show the technique to teach it, but I never, this isn't the Smith or the Gracie or the anything, because the human body's been around for thousands of years, and we've been grappling and fighting for thousands of years, and all these techniques were used in pancration thousands of years ago, and so rediscover something and then name it after themselves, I think it's a little egotistical.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of that going on now in the grappling world. Billy Wicks used to say, and teach on the mat 4 techniques: a sit out, switch, side roll, wizard, to catch your submissions. And that's really what catch wrestling is. It's catching a guy in a submission in wrestling, the Bulgarian headlock, and it's also brutal on the ground, where you take your head and drive it into the jaw and then twist the neck up. When you get that on the ground and you come over the head, put your hand right here on the forehead, that's another brutal hold from Pops that I coach folks on. And I know some years ago, Pat, you may not remember this, I was closer to his father because he's younger than me, but one of Pops's wrestlers, Adam Dehart, you called one of his matches.
Oh yeah,
and he did.
Yeah, I remember Adam quite well.
Yeah, great young man.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is exciting stuff. And Paz, let me ask you, what do you think? Do you think that the pro wrestling fans, because you have your pulse on the business, do you think that the pro wrestling fans, how do you think that they're going to take to the Shoot Pro Wrestling?
I think they should love it, and I think they would love it, just because you're going to add, obviously, like you said, a little bit of pomp and circumstance. You're going to put some videos, you're going to have some entrances, but outside of that stuff that they love, I think the fact you can have the pin rather than it's just grappling for submissions, I think that adds an extra element. It almost makes it a little bit like pro wrestling, where they're very interested. And obviously, Barnett right now, Josh Barnett with the Bloodsport, that's taken off big time. So I feel like pro wrestling fans are into it.
Definitely, and we want to distinguish with Bloodsport. Josh has been with Scientific Wrestling with Jake Shannon from its inception, and one of their coaches. But the difference with Bloodsport, we want to make it clear: Bloodsport is a unique presentation, but it's still a work. Yeah, this is 100% shoot pro wrestling.
Pat, are you buddies with Josh Barnett or close with him at all? Obviously, you guys been down the road together. What's the relationship like with Barnett?
I've always gotten along with Josh really well. Really, I've always loved our interactions. We've spent a lot of time together in the past. It's been years since I've hung out with him, but Josh is a great guy and very intelligent guy. We've had some very deep conversations outside of the realm of course, MMA and grappling and all of that, more along the lines of just kind of where the world's at type stuff, and very, very intuitive, very intelligent human being.
Yeah, and Josh was with Eric for years, and before that with Matt Hume. And, Matt Hume came out of Pancras, and we were talking earlier about the history and how that predated the UFC.
And
I know Pat knows Matt Hume very well. They fought, obviously.
Yeah, so back in the day when, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that fight, I had gone out and trained with Ken Gabrielson, who's actually the first real American to get a black belt under any of the Gracies. Ken's a great guy, great instructor. I trained actually with, trying to remember which Gracie was out there at his gym at the time. Chris Rose, who was a LAPD guy, and Earl Laux and a bunch of those guys back in the days out in Orange County, California. I slept on the couch at Ken Gabrielson's gym for 6 weeks and trained there for that fight. That was my first pay-per-view, Extreme Battlecade. And I got to tell you, it was that fight because I physically ragdolled Matt Hume for the most part. He caught me with a couple knees, and the referee stopped the fight in between rounds because he thought my nose was broken. Back then, the sport was under a lot of scrutiny, so it is what it is. But more than anything else, it was that fight on screen when you watch that fight, physically dominating Matt Hume, but at no point did I feel like I had control of him. He was a very, very intelligent fighter, very slick, very technical guy. And it was at that point that I recognized I was ranked fourth in the world at the time. Matt Hume was ranked number one. And I realized I just might not be world class and I need to sharpen my game a lot. And it's because of that fight with Matt Hume where I really tightened my game up. And that's probably one of the bigger reasons why I ended up winning a UFC title was that fight.
Yeah, and when you look at Matt Hume, and this is interesting too, when we talk about grappling in the cage and the rule set here, and the danger, the risk to amateur wrestlers that don't know submissions. If you go back to the contenders in the grappling, I believe it was Kenny Monday, who was Olympic gold medalist, wrestled Matt Hume or grappled Matt Hume in that contenders, and Matt finished him. And Frank Shamrock finished Dan Henderson. You know, so just because you're a great wrestler doesn't necessarily mean, even with this having the pin, it's going to give the wrestler more of an advantage, but it's still always going to be a contest.
I feel like as you guys grow the sport, obviously, do you think the Sambo guys would be like a huge advantage? Do you think that they would be, perfect for this?
Yeah.
I think that they, because of their wrestling background in Russia and certainly America, it's grown here. So yeah, they will. And, I had, this is not their style. They don't want to be on their backs either, right? They'll belly down because of the rule set. So they will work off of their backs. And that was an interesting thing that my old a judo coach that used to run the judo program at my gym, after I had retired from the UFC and had dealt with my neck injury and stuff, there was I think he was 6-time world champion Sambo guy from Russia that would come over and do seminars every year. And he was quite a bit younger than me, and he was about 225 pounds. He was a big guy, big Russian. And for some reason, I don't know why he was doing it, but I think the judo coach at my gym tried setting me up, and he goes, "Hey, he wants to grapple against you." And I thought, well, I know his game. He's a lot younger. He's a lot bigger. He's a lot stronger. I probably need to go into this and be aware of the situation that I'm about to go into. And I said, I'll just start on my back. I'll just let him, because I know what he's going to do. He's going to go for a leg lock right away. And so he did. He went for an Achilles lock, and he tried breaking my leg is what he tried doing right away. I mean, it was full force the minute he hit it. And I was able to get his feet, his leverage points off my hip, come up, pass, and end up mounted on top of him. And then he bellied down, and I slapped him in the head a couple times. And then we did it again, and he did the exact same thing. He thought he was going to get me, and passed again, and got mounted on him and slapped him in the head some more. And then I just shook his hand and walked out. And so I was well into my 40s at that time, and I was kind of annoyed with my judo coach for trying to set me up. So I set out to make a point and make sure that I let these guys know that I'm old, but I'm not that old, and I can still get it done. And but the Sambo guys are very dangerous. If you don't know leg locks very well, you get yourself in trouble real quick.
Now, being a pioneer of MMA, obviously, like we talked about, the first welterweight tournament winner, the first welterweight champion, do you feel like you're kind of like being a pioneer again here and really kind of setting the pace for like a new sport, for this new shoot pro? Do you think that's the direction you want to be headed?
I just love the history of it all, right? So for me, it's about bringing back, because this is stuff that I used to talk about a lot back when I was fighting even, is, hey, man, people are forgetting the rich history of badass American grapplers. The whole talk is all Brazilian jiu-jitsu and this and that. Like, you're forgetting about the Burnses and the Gotchas and the Danny Hodges and the guys that smashed people. on a regular basis. And, this is super important for people to understand the history of what I'm talking about. Like, this isn't the flavor of the month type stuff. This is real history, and only the best athletes and the wisest minds. You've got to have a great game. You've got to be a thinker, and you have to be a monster to be able to survive under these rule sets. This isn't hey, I'm a IT developer at a corporation, and I do jujitsu 6 days a week, and I got my black belt, and I can submit people. Those guys are dangerous as well. I make no bones about that. I've grappled with a lot of those types of very, very intelligent, analytical-minded grapplers. But when you go up against a powerhouse who has the ability to rip your arms out of socket and crunch your neck and also pin you, that's just a different level of animal.
Absolutely. And John, I think the timing of this is so cool because TKO was formed with WWE and UFC, and this is just a natural progression. And that's why I say back to the future, because it brings both sports together. And Pat and I have talked about this, and Jake and I spoke about it today. One of the great things personally for me that why I love Shoot Pro is we have know some folks, very close friends that we've lost or are not functional in society now due to the CTE and TBI. And as we build and grow this and we get TV and we get sponsors, it's going to enable wrestlers to come from off the mat into the cage again, but not have those risks, and it still be really exciting and fan friendly.
Do you think, like the Olympic wrestlers, like recently I've read a few Olympic wrestlers, even guys that placed, don't want to do MMA, they have no interest in it. I think, right, Shoot Pro would be perfect because they have no interest in doing MMA. They've even said it. They have no interest in it.
And there's a difference too, and I think we talked about this a little bit on Hannibal. Freestyle wrestling, of course, Greco is always, it's the upper body, but freestyle wrestling has evolved. The rules have changed, and great athletes, great wrestlers, but it's become more of a game of points and very little to no mat wrestling. It's the folk style wrestlers, the American wrestlers with all that mat wrestling to wrestle into submissions that are going to have a distinct advantage with Shoot Pro under this rule set.
Pat, right? I mean, if you're an Olympic wrestler, you have no interest in like the boxing aspect or getting punched in the face, you don't want to do MMA, go right into Shoot Pro. Literally go right into Shoot Pro. Just hone your submission skills, and you could, be successful.
100%. And as this sport grows and explodes and the money goes up, it's going to be a great avenue, and I mean, even back when I was training, the guys like, Cale Sanderson was talking about potentially getting into MMA before, he got the huge offer from Penn State to go coach there. He and I talked, a couple times leading up to him taking that job at Penn State. Royce Alger from the University of Iowa training really not thoroughly in the MMA game and the striking portion of it, ended up running into trouble. There are wrestlers, great wrestlers who are cut out for that rough and tumble MMA type of life, and that, the brutality of what that sport has to offer. And then there are guys with a game that they don't want a part of having a nose that's this flat and dealing with that, right? So, it's going to depend, but having the option to go and make, a lot of money to win a world title in Shoot Pro and catch as catch can style matches, that's a big deal, and it's going to grow.
Yeah, and it's more wrestler friendly. There's a lot of old school wrestling coaches that don't like MMA. And it's obviously a lot different when you add the striking and then a lot of the CTE and TBI issues that folks are having. But with Shoot Pro, It's a much more wrestler-friendly sport too. And as we grow and evolve this, where I see it going is once we get more investors and we get the money, and as we get into TV, is creating a feeder program of coaches and structuring it maybe old school, like the early UFCs with the tournaments, and then a super match, which could feature someone from the professional wrestling ranks whose skill set is conducive to shoot pro. I mean, God, we were talking about the Olympics, and we were talking about Gable Stevenson, who's very close with our commissioner, Gerald Briscoe. And the great thing about having Jerry as our commissioner and on all of our calls with Jake is that he's the one who brought the way I met Jerry Briscoe years ago. There was a young man that I had coached that went on to Nebraska to wrestling college, and this kid kind of looked like The Rock, and it was a young kid named Tim Dudley, TJ Dudley, and he came within a couple points of winning a national championship in Nebraska, and Jerry was recruiting him because a lot of people don't know this. Jerry Briscoe's role with the WWE was to go out to wrestling tournaments and to recruit guys. That's what Vince gave him the checkbook to go out and do that. And he did it for years. In South Carolina, he knew all the coaches. He knew the Citadel coach. He knew my buddy Jason Valek, who coached Newberry College. He actually came with me to a Newberry College meet, which wasn't even Division I. They were great national champions at that time, but he was in D1, D2, D3. He was out there. And a lot of people don't realize that are professional wrestling fans how many of the WWE's stars came from the mat and came from Jerry Briscoe. And with Jerry as our commissioner, and with a lot of these guys no longer under contract by AEW or WWE, man, there are a lot of opportunities for us with that Rolodex to bring these guys in and make them part of Shoot Pro in a variety of capacities. And maybe one of those capacities is super matches. That's where I see it going.
That's great. And even Gable Stevenson, obviously his brother Bobby, who's just left WWE as well. I mean, that's another guy. You want to bring in Barnett if he wants to do it. Jake Hager, Riddle. There's a ton of guys you guys could use for that for sure. Bobby Lashley.
A guy that's got a lot of sizzle too, and was a fantastic pinner. Fantastic pinner from Kent State. I think he's still got the pinning record. A guy named Nick Nemeth, who folks know as Dolph Ziggler. He is perfect for this because it also comes down to the style of wrestler. Like Pat said, there's a style of wrestler that does better in MMA, and there's a style of wrestler that does better in Shoot Pro, and that's a guy like Nick Nemeth, who was a pinning machine.
Definitely. That's a good one. Pat, what about you? Would you come back maybe and do something out of retirement?
I mean, I've had my fun, to be honest with you. I wouldn't mind it. I've got to make sure that my cardio has to be a lot better. I've actually just started running again. I've had about a year and a half of actually. I didn't realize I had gotten so busy doing so many other things that my respiratory issues, I had a black mold and bacterial infection going on that I wasn't even aware of. And my business partner, Doc Will Spencer, and one of his mentors, Steve Moore, analyzed me and told me what to put in my body to turn my immune system back on, and finally was able to heal my respiratory system. So I just started running again. I'm feeling much stronger, much better. And so maybe, but I mean, let's be honest. There were the days where, I could wrestle for 5 hours and wake up the next day and wrestle for 5 hours and wake up the next day and wrestle for 5 more. It didn't bother me at all. I feel like I've climbed the mountain enough times, but if you can find an old guy that's long in the tooth, I might.
Well, I'll tell you
I might
what.
go
There's
back in.
Yeah.
something else that we should mention here is Jake did a show in Colorado that was all tag team matches, shoot tag team matches.
Wow.
Man, so you get older folks like Pat and I, maybe a tag team match, and we're gassing out, and you run to the corner and tag in your opponent, your partner. But yeah, you got to check this out, man. I really encourage folks to go to shootprowrestling.com because Jake, I'll tell you, man, Jake Shannon, I've known him 20 years. He is a brilliant businessman and wrestler himself and grappler himself, historian, author. He's a fellow author. He's done a number of books over the years on catch wrestling. He actually did the book with Billy Robinson, his biography that I urge folks to read. So Jake is he's the owner of this, and man, I'll tell you what, he has got some great creative ideas. I came up with an idea for a match that Jake really liked, and I'd really like to see an Iron Man champion. Pro wrestling has the Iron Man. My concept for the Iron Man is 60 minutes, most falls and submissions in that time frame. It's a different type of athlete that would win the Iron Man.
Yep, for sure. As we start to wind it down, we hit the finish here. Give us one last push, the King of Connecticut. Give us one last push for Shoot Pro in North Dakota.
August 31st, Sky Dancer Casino. Brandon Riggins takes on Blade Ock. Man, we are excited. It's going to be, I'm managing the distribution with Jake, and for Jake, we're looking at getting this on TV, on Fight TV, on the Hannibal TV. We're going to get a 30-minute show, man, that is going to rival anything WWE and UFC are doing. We're really putting together a world-class show. Pre-show, interviews, get to know these guys, and then they do battle in the cage. Catch comes to the cage August 31st, Sky Dancer Casino in North Dakota.
Pat, where can everybody follow you, social media and otherwise? Where can they find the Croatian sensation?
They can follow me. I, for some reason, got locked out of my Instagram. So people can follow me at Soil, SOIL, Soil Savior with a number 1 behind it, at Soil Savior. And then also PJ Miletich on X or Twitter.
Awesome. Matt, what about you? Where can everybody find you?
Of course, my name is Matthew Granahan, but my Facebook alias is Matthew Granamania King. Welcome to the world of Granamania, where you'll be treated to a lot of comedy memes, and entertaining stuff, and a lot of Shoot Pro promotion and action.
Awesome. Pat, thank you so much. It's been an honor. Granimal, great to talk to you again. Thank you guys so much. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Have a great night.